Hi, and welcome to Liftoff. I'm Simon Siddiqui, CEO and co-founder of Grad Greenhouse, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Erica Keswin. Erica is a workplace strategist, an author, and a real expert in humans at work. Thank you so much for joining us, Erica.
Thank you. So great to see you.
Yeah, I first learned about your work late last year. I was listening to Future Strong with Lindsay Pollock and Nikki Garcia, and just happened to catch the episode on LinkedIn Live and was absolutely riveted when I heard about you, heard about your book. I felt like you put your finger on something with Rituals Roadmap that it was something that I hadn't really heard articulated before. You were able to sort of capture the importance of rituals and connection at work in a way that was so insightful that I went out and bought the book, have talked to tons of people about it, and have been waiting to talk to you. So thank you so much for joining today. It's very exciting for me. I would love to start off by hearing sort of how you got here. You're an expert in the business of working humans. How did you get what is your career journey and how did you get to this point and write these books?
Great. So, my background is in human capital, which I describe as really helping companies improve performance through people. So, I worked in human resources consulting, I worked as an executive recruiter, connecting great people to jobs, and really always focused on that side of the business equation. As technology became more prevalent, I think I got my iPhone in 2010 or something like that. I began to see the impact of technology on how people were connecting at work, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I ended up having this idea for Bring Your Human to Work, which really looked at what I at that time was calling the business case for conversation. I mean, what are we missing by all being in our separate parts of the office, calling into conference calls because we don't want to walk down the hall? Seems like so long ago. And so I wrote Bring Your Human to Work in 2018. And the idea behind that was that creating a more human workplace is not only good for people, but it's good for business, and that those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I that book came out, and I didn't necessarily have my eye on writing another book right away until one night I had this epiphany. I was out to dinner with a colleague of mine at an Italian restaurant on the Upper West Side of New York City, where we go every month and have I'm not a big drinker, but we would go at once a month and have a big glass of red wine and just talk about the book and life and how things were going. And it was our ritual. And, we didn't necessarily call it that, but that's just what we did. And as we were talking about the book and the feedback, it occurred to me that when I think about all the people I interviewed for Bring Your Human to Work and all of their stories, while they weren't calling them rituals, one of the things that they did was use rituals as a way to connect people and to create that more human workplace. And I was like, oh my gosh, here we are having our monthly ritual at this Italian restaurant. I wonder if this is the thing. So at that point, I just decided to dive into the science of rituals and learn about what they do for us as people, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But, I came to that topic in a very authentic and organic way.
So for those people who really aren't familiar with the concept of rituals, I would love for you to explain what are rituals and why are they important in the work context.
So, the definition of a ritual, at least my working definition, it has three component parts. The first is that a ritual is something to which we assign a certain amount of meaning and intention. Number one. Number two, there's typically a regular cadence with a ritual. It could be something we do once a day, that once a month dinner at this Italian restaurant. It could be something we do once a year, but there is some regularity to it. The third part, though, is really interesting, which is a ritual is something that goes beyond its practical purpose. And so, what does that mean? I'm sitting here in my home office, which you can see a little bit. It's my Peloton, and let's say that the lights go out and I light a candle so I can read what I'm doing. That's not a ritual. But if I decide to light a candle, like I did during the pandemic, every day at 6 o'clock to signify the end of the workday and the beginning of my time at home, especially in the pandemic when we didn't have a lot of structure. I'm not lighting that candle every day at 6 o'clock so I can see. I'm lighting it because there's
Mhm.
meaning and intention and there's a cadence to it. So that's my definition. I talk a lot about one of my rituals is I'm a morning coffee drinker, so I have my Starbucks here, where
Mhm.
I yeah, the caffeine is nice. I actually don't necessarily need the caffeine as my purpose, but my ritual is just getting the cup, taking a couple deep breaths, feeling the heat on my hands. And rituals. The other part of rituals is that they ground us and they bring some order out of chaos, which I have found to be very impactful both personally and professionally.
Hmm. One of the most interesting things about I mean, you describe a ritual that clearly you had pre-pandemic and you have now that's sort of an individual ritual. And I think that was probably a light bulb moment for a lot of people was during the pandemic when they no longer had their commute and they no longer had some of the key elements that maybe were built in, that they felt this sort of um, inability to separate the day from the work day from the personal time and sort of this absence of rituals. And I think the fact that you retained your coffee one, recognized what it was and retained your coffee one is, I think, really important. And some of us have built those. I think over the past 2 years we've realized that we're missing them.
I left New York City in the pandemic, and I was out in the country, and I like did this happy dance when I found out that the Starbucks closest to me, which was still a 20-minute drive, but I was great to get out of the house, actually had a drive-through. I was like, whew, I
Oh.
can, that's the other part of a ritual. The lengths that people will go to maintain that ritual is, kind of gives you a sense of how important they are to people.
Can you talk about some of the collective rituals that you found in your as you were researching the book and came across that really stood out to you?
Yeah. So I wasn't sure, when you're writing a book, you're not quite, what's so important, a piece of it is sort of the structure. The content's important, but what is the flow and how does it all fit together? And so you often don't know that in the beginning, and then you start to interview people and companies, and it ideally begins to create shape. And so as I
Hmm.
began to interview people, where I saw these rituals clustering was in and around the employee experience, and that became the structure of the book. So I would ask people this, I sort of say now, this kind of magic question, which I didn't know was going to be so impactful to help people say, oh, that's our ritual. And so for your listeners, I'll share the magic question, even though I still hope you read the
Hmm.
book. So I would say, for example, to the head of HR at Chipotle or LinkedIn or law firm, whoever's in the book, when do employees at, Chipotle, for example, feel most Chipotle-ish? When do people
Hmm.
feel most connected in that rush of oxytocin and connection? And so when I asked that question, I have certain people that would talk about the onboarding process. Certain people would say, "Oh, we feel most connected in our meetings." At Eileen Fisher, they ring a chime before every meeting to kind of stop and have people feel centered. Some people said, "Oh, it's at our annual award recognition where we all come together remotely or in person and give an award to someone who's really embodied our company values." Other people said it's when they eat together. And so it really ran the spectrum. And there are certainly some of my favorites. I mean, one is at Allbirds, the cool felt sneaker company. They have a ritual called 40
Hmm.
at 4, which in many ways took the place of the unhealthy smoke break that many companies used to have. Thankfully, people aren't smoking as much anymore. And they do, it's called 40 at 4. They do 40 push ups at 4 o'clock. And it started very organically by a guy who'd gone to the doctor and decided he wanted to get healthy and was started doing 40 push-ups a day in the office, and the guy next to him joined, and the woman down the hall joined, and 5 other people joined and didn't do the push-ups, but they watched the push-ups, and it became a thing, and
Hmm.
it stuck. And even during the pandemic, they would rotate different people online to lead these push-ups. And so rituals can come from anywhere. I say top down, bottom up, inside out. And you never know when something is just going to stick.
So one of the things that I really, we're both Northwestern alums, and so I was really taken with the story about Northwestern because it's so funny. When you go to college, you're always super spirited, and you wear it with great pride, your T-shirts or whatever. But I remember a few years ago, like I noticed that they were doing this thing called March Through the Arch, and I was like, gosh, I don't remember doing that. But I thought it was so great. I thought maybe I missed it because sometimes when you get to college, you don't go to every activity or whatever. So I was like, maybe I missed it. It seems great. And they also do this thing now where they spell out the year with their bodies on the field. I don't know if you've seen the picture
Yeah,
of that where they do that. So I assume that both of those things were sort of things that maybe happened that I missed. And then I read your book, and well, I'd love you to tell the story because
yeah,
I
yeah.
think for
Well,
all
here's
the
the good news.
Northwestern
You didn't
alums
miss
out
it.
there.
You didn't sleep through it. You didn't miss it because it's relatively
Good
new.
to know. Good to know.
So yeah, I am a big Northwestern fan, and I went and I interviewed the president, Morty Shapiro, and asked him that magic question, when do you think people feel most, Northwestern or Wildcat-ish, the
Hmm.
mascot? And he chuckled, and Morty came from Amherst College and from the East Coast, and like many East Coast institutions, they've been around for hundreds of years and are steeped in tradition and rituals. And when Morty got to Northwestern, he got together with his team and he's like, okay, team, what are the rituals here? And people were like, I don't know. They kind of looked at him like he was a little nuts. And turned out there were a few, but it was very different than what he had become accustomed to. So he said, you know what, we need to create some rituals to make people feel connected. And as an aside, I don't even think I write this in the book, but one of the things he shared with me when he got there was that people didn't even really wear like the color at Northwestern's purple. People didn't even walk around in a lot of the Northwestern, you know, gear from the bookstore with the name on it. Like there were all these names of other schools. Like there just wasn't a lot of school spirit in the same way. So there's a big arch on campus, and it's called Weber Arch. And Morty says to his team, "All right, we're gonna have something where at the the first day during orientation, all of the students are gonna walk through this arch, and they called it March Through the Arch, and we're gonna give people this sense of coming together." So the first year, they announce it, and he doesn't think to contact the police in Evanston, Illinois, where it's based, and like block off the streets. So they had about 50 kids marching through the arch and weaving in and out of traffic. Probably a lawsuit waiting to happen. Luckily, nobody got hurt. And he's like, "Okay, this was great, but we need to clearly get our act together for the second year." So the second year, they probably had a couple hundred people walking through, but by the third year, this was starting to become a ritual not to be missed. And now, um, I have my kids are freshmen in college. Sadly, I didn't get any of them to go to Northwestern, but a lot of my friends have kids there, and this is something where, as a parent, you drop your kid off and then you wait a day or two for the march to the arch, and the parents are waiting with the camera, and they know exactly what time they're going to come through the arch, and all 2,000 undergrads and the transfer students walk through the arch. And my favorite story that Morty told was he spoke to a kid in the school, and he says to the kid, so tell me, you're getting ready, you're going to graduate from Northwestern, what stood out, what was one of the most impactful moments? And he said, President Shapiro, I got to tell you, the march through the arch was so meaningful, and I just felt so moved by doing what everybody before me had done. And then Morty tells me, with this wink in his eye, I didn't have the heart to tell the poor kid it was only the third year. And that's the
That's
magic
awesome.
of
Yeah.
rituals. And I'll share one more little thing, which I don't even know if you might not have even seen because it's not in the book.
Hmm.
When I do a keynote presentation on rituals, and I incorporated this because I found out about it after the book came out. But I followed Northwestern's Instagram, and in June of 2020, as many of us remember, that I mean, every graduation was canceled. Pretty much everything was canceled in person. And I saw
Hmm.
this really cool thing on the Northwestern Instagram, and I reached out to the person who'd posted it and got permission. They sent me the photo. It was the brother of a Northwestern graduate. She graduated in June of 2020 and was so devastated that this Morty, after the March of the Arch became such an important ritual, he added
Mm,
the back end of the ritual was which let's
mm,
go back out through the arch at the end. And one of the things
mm,
I talk about in the book are beginnings and endings are what I call prime rituals real estate. They're great opportunities for rituals. The beginning of a 4 year journey, the beginning of a meeting, the beginning of a project. There's just, it's
mm.
ripe for rituals. So she was so upset, A, not to graduate with her friends, but B, not to go back out through this arch because it felt like something was missing. And so
Yeah.
it helps to have a brother in the family who's a woodworker, and he created and built
Oh,
this 30-foot arch in his backyard. I'll send you the picture and you can include it in
that's
whatever
amazing.
this thing
Yeah.
for the podcast. But she invited like 4 or 5 of her friends over, and they all together marched back through the arch. And it's like this goosebump moment when you see it. Just again, it highlights
Wow.
just the magic of how rituals can make us feel.
Yeah, that's incredible. I had a daughter who graduated in 2020 as well and didn't. Something like that, I can see how it would have filled this void. I mean, we were all sort of trying to figure stuff out at that time.
I
And
know.
it's interesting, my son goes to William and Mary, which is, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
ritual central, right? Talk about history and having things that have gone back hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool. So I wanted to ask you about this how people could create points of connection now. So, where the New York Times recently had an article that talked about a 2 year, 50 million person experiment in how we work.
Yeah.
And, that's what the past 2 years has been. We've so all of a sudden, all the things we said we couldn't do. No, you can't work from home. No, we can't do that job flexibly. You can now, everything changed. And so we were able to experiment on this huge scale. But companies like ours, Grad Greenhouse, we were created during the pandemic. We have a global team, and many of us have never met. And there are many other companies like that with either new entrants to the team who have never met folks who don't know the culture. What are your thoughts, recommendations around how do you build connection? How do you build rituals that are meaningful among remote teams or dispersed teams or teams that don't have a shared language and a shared culture?
Yeah. So, well, first, I would not to put you on the spot, but I would say, it's for you to ask yourself and your team members this question of when do you feel most greenhouse-ish? Um,
Mm,
and if there isn't an answer to that, it's saying, okay, well, we need to start to build those moments. I think that one of the reasons why I wanted to have a chapter in the book on onboarding is that you only get that one chance to make that first impression. There's a line in the book. I actually wrote it. It's. I didn't come up with it, but it's in both books. It's by a researcher named Penelope Leach, and it's "Start as you mean to go on." And I just love that line because if even if you have people all over, how do you want this culture to be? You need to figure that out as people come in the door. So I would tell people to really spend time looking at those onboarding rituals. The other thing that I would say is, um, it's about the values. When you figure out what, I mean, you can have strong cultural values if you're all in person, if you're remote, or if you're somewhere in between. And there really is this correlation between the strength of your culture and your ability to get this sounds totally cheesy, but your ability to get the values off the walls and into the halls, like into the atmosphere. And so what are those values? And depending on what one is, maybe when you have a global, a Zoom meeting or a Microsoft Teams or whatever you use, with all of your team members, maybe you start a meeting where everybody goes around and says something that's connected to those values. And so it's these very little things, but I think it's the alignment of all of these touch points around your values. And to know if your values are working, I describe this, the litmus test is the fork in the road. So you're at the fork in the road. Do you hire this person? Do you launch this new product? All these business decisions that you're making. Do you have this person on your podcast? Um, your values should tell you, do you take a left, do you take a right when you're at that fork in the road? And if they're not driving those decisions, either A, companies that might have too many values and there's confusion, maybe they're the wrong values, or maybe the values are not well enough defined to drive that behavior. So I think that really is the starting point. And then the last thing that I would say may not be so popular, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway, is that at some point, I really do urge people to make an investment when it feels safe to bring everybody together for a couple of days, and you will be able to live off that relationship capital that you've built from that
Hmm.
in-person experience for a long time to come.
Your recent article in about on-sites being the new
Yeah, in
off-sites,
HBR. Yep.
right? The NHBR, you talk about this, about companies intentionally using time together and building it in a very thoughtful way. Can you share sort of an example of some, company that you've seen that has used gathering as an opportunity to really build and store up that capital?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there are companies right now that have decided to get rid of, they were an in-person kind of organization and now they've gotten rid of their office space. And so they've said, you know what, we're going to get together once a month and we're going to bring everybody in. Now, that doesn't work if you're global like you are. These two examples, the majority of the people are in and around outside of New York City. I think other organizations have a different cadence. It could be once a quarter, it could be twice a year. I mean, many companies were doing this pre-pandemic that were fully remote. There's just many, many more companies now that, like Buffer and Basecamp. I mean, that have been written about in terms of how, Basecamp, I think, they got together pre-pandemic twice a year for 4 or 5 days and are very intentional. This is what they do on the first night. The middle of the night, they take one day off. They have a really cool, um, I don't know if I'd call it a maybe it's a ritual, but which I sort of love, where they're together for a full week, and on Monday, like the first day back at work, they give everybody that day off, knowing that it's exhausting. They've all been together, and you kind of you want time to do your laundry and like reacclimate to being home. So I think the cadence is different for everyone, but to your point, it is about being intentional about where, who, what, where, when, why we are getting together. And what I would urge everybody to think about is, here's what you don't want. And this I think is going to be the title of my next article. So you've heard it here first, which is something about a recipe for resentment. So here's a recipe for resentment. You tell everybody to come in, fly in, drive in, depending on where it is, and you get there, and half your team's not there, and there's no plan, and you're in the corner of your office doing what you could have been doing from home. So that is what we want to stay away from. And instead, when you come in, this is the day when you have breakfast together. This is the day when you have a one-on-one with your manager. This is the day that you do, strategy work. There's got to be a plan, and you've got to be intentional, or in the midst of this great resignation, I'm telling you, your people are going to be 1 foot out the door.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope everyone takes note of that. And that's great, great advice for us as well. I will ask the team, when do they feel the most grad greenhouse-ish? Because I think it is really important that it's authentic. I mean, rather than top down, rather than, me saying, hey, this is our culture, this is how you're supposed to feel. I'm hearing how people actually feel.
Yeah, you'll
Um,
have to let me know. Be very curious to
yeah.
see what they say.
I I definitely will. Um, Question for you about bringing your human to work. There's a lot of talk. I mean, we work with Gen Z, we work with universities, we work with students who are about to graduate and begin their careers, and we know that this population really votes with their values. I mean, they want to find a match that really inspires them, that feels authentic. They don't, they're less likely to sort of just fall for the marketing line or the PR. So and they want to bring their whole selves to work. What advice do you have? But also, some of them are working remotely. So, what advice do you have, or what can a new entrant do uh, to balance sort of bringing their whole selves and connecting with folks in the workplace, making their mark versus sort of fitting in, you know, understanding the culture, decoding the culture, if you will, remotely, because that's something that we see that's more of a challenge now than ever. Is these sort of dual motivations. One, they want to be their whole selves at work, and the other is that they don't know the organization at all, and they're learning it through a screen.
Yeah, it is very tricky. I would say from a bottom up perspective, um, you know, if someone gives you an opportunity to come into the office and meet people in person, like the answer is yes. Yes, yes, and yes. Now you might not get that chance, but if and when you do, take advantage of that. I would say that's number one. Also, you know, get involved. If your organization has employee resource groups, join them. Figure out ways to authentically and organically connect with people, kind of up, down, and sideways. Your peers, other leaders in the organization that maybe are not your boss that are running these employee resource groups. And if your company doesn't have one, maybe start one. I mean, I think you have to get creative about. You want to create these as many sort of touch points for connection outside of your immediate group that you can. I mean, it's funny. I'm working on an article right now for HBR it's about professional development, and I think from a top down perspective, a huge opportunity for people to attract and retain young people, early career talent, is to really showcase the kinds of opportunities that people have to grow on the job personally and professionally. So, that's something that's a lever that I think many HR leaders can flex maybe more than before. And a lot of these opportunities don't have to cost anything. From a bottom up perspective, I think about the Google, the old, I mean, maybe some groups at Google still do it, where it's like the 80/20 rule, where 80% of your job is spent on one thing and you have 20% to sort of engage in other things. And so, again, from a bottom up perspective, see in your culture, like, is there an opportunity outside of your day job, to begin to build relationships and kind of poke around and build relationships across the organization. And I think it will serve you well in your current job, but for years to come.
That's actually brilliant, the 80/20 idea, because that's sort of naturally where people are going nowadays. People have side gigs, or they have
Yep.
something that they do freelance or something, because people do have a lot of interests, and that allows people to have that within the realm of work rather than just as an external. Oh, thank you for that. What makes you hopeful? As somebody who's studied workplace dynamics and engagement and helped, workplace, very many companies strengthen their their cultures, their HR functions, how they're growing people. What makes you hopeful?
So, you know, one of the things that makes me hopeful is, during over the last couple of years, um, we all had to show a more human side of ourselves. We didn't have a choice. There were kids running in the background, there were dogs, we had technology outages. And I think for years and years and years, I mean, I can say it from my perspective, everything always had to be sort of perfect. And if one of my kids walked in, I would die of embarrassment and get out, and all that. Now, I don't know. It's like the curtain's been opened, and we are real people now. I do hope that a year from now, 2 years from now, we aren't only seeing each other on Zoom and on video, but I hope that we don't forget what we saw. And that is a big focus on mine right now, with leaders who have seen their engagement, their employee engagement, go up and stay up, is their willingness to continue to be a little vulnerable, to share, you know what, you might think I have it all figured out because I'm the boss, but you know what, I
Hmm.
really don't. So that gives me hope that, as somebody, I'm 53 and I feel like back in the day, as a working woman, I was always hiding all of that. And I think the new generations are saying, you know what, like we don't want to hide it. We aren't going to hide it. And if I need to go home to feed my dog, 14 million households in the United States got dogs during the pandemic. Like they're just putting it out there. And so I think that's great, not just for the younger generations, but it's good for all of us.
14 million?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Wow.
The
Those must be
pandemic
some
pandemic puppies.
yeah. Think of how confused they must be when their people go to work for
No, it's
extended
big.
periods
It's
of time.
actually been a big challenge, and there's an amazing organization I've worked with many times over the last couple of years, Banfield Pet Hospital, and they're on a mission to help organizations create programs and benefits so that people, their biggest worry was that once people went back to the office, they'd have to put their pets up for adoption. Like like
Mm,
a lot of these implications and ramifications of the pandemic that a lot of us never considered. I mean, because
yeah.
not every company lets you bring your dog to work, so that could be a whole
Right.
other topic for a podcast.
That's right. That's right. Well, my last question for you is one nugget for somebody just starting off their career, a piece of advice for launchers.
um, you know 9 out of 10 people don't leave a company, they leave their manager. So as you're beginning to interview and figure out, your next role, you might not be able to know everything about this person that you're going to go work for, but I would urge you to, think less perhaps about some of the perks and about like it really makes a difference. And is this person going to help you grow? Is this person going to value the diversity that you bring? Is this what's important to you from a values perspective, and how does that person fit? Now it's not always perfect, and you could start a new job and then your boss leaves, but it is something to really think about as you're taking a new job.
Well, thank you so much, Erica. That's great advice. Because I think we do try to, companies do sometimes try to use the bells and whistles as the attraction, and that's wonderful advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I highly recommend your book to everyone. Follow Erica on social media, and lots of great articles and lots of great insights that we need as we prepare, to be better and stronger and really benefit from some of the things we've learned over the past 2 years. So thank you.
Well, great to see you, and thank you so much.